Okay, so think about all those great civilizations from way back, like the Mayans or the Romans. We always hear about their downfall and usually chalk it up to like wars or some crazy politics, right?
Right, yeah.
But what if there was this other kind of silent force at play? Something we don't really think about much.
Hmm. I
I'm
wonder.
talking about soil erosion. Like every year, we're talking billions of tons of topsoil. Just gone, vanished.
Wow. Billions.
Billions, the very thing we depend on for food,
Ugh.
just disappearing. And I bet you've noticed it too, right? Land not being as productive as it used to be.
Yeah, for sure. Like even today, places with lots of rain are struggling. The rain's not doing its job. Too much just runs off.
Exactly. And, a lot of that comes down to, well, we've messed with the natural ground cover.
Yeah, it's like this downward spiral, less
Yeah.
cover, more runoff, worse erosion.
Bad news all around. But hey, that's what we're diving into today, right? Of the solution that, well, it seems almost too simple. Vetiver grass.
Vetiver grass, huh?
Yeah. We're using this World Bank handbook as our guide. It's called the Hedge Against Erosion. We're going to figure out how this one type of grass is tackling this massive global problem.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
And it's not just about keeping the dirt in place. This is about creating, like, living infrastructure that manages water better, even helps with pests, all without breaking a sweat.
Sounds promising. So how long has this vetiver thing been around? Is this like some new discovery?
Not at all. This handbook, the first edition, came out in '87. We're looking at the fourth one from '93.
Wow, so it's been around for a while.
Exactly. And get this, while researching, the World Bank folks, they found farmers near Mysore in India. They'd been using vetiver hedges for maybe 200 years.
200 years? No way.
Isn't that wild? Generations of farmers. And it's not just that one place. They tested this thing in all sorts of climates and soil types. India, China, Philippines, Australia.
So not just a fluke then. This is tried and true. And is this handbook aimed at like big agricultural companies or something?
Not really. It's really meant for people on the ground, field workers, farmers, especially in those developing countries. It's all about giving them practical ways to protect their land and their water.
Okay, I like it. Practical advice. So let's get specific. We talked about erosion in general, but this book gets into the nitty-gritty, starting with this thing called sheet erosion.
Sheet erosion. Doesn't sound as dramatic as a landslide or something. Why is it such a big deal?
Well, here's the thing. It's sneaky. You don't always see it happening. It's that gradual loss of topsoil, the good stuff, all because of rain and runoff.
Ah, so it's kind of stealthy.
Exactly. But don't let that fool you. It adds up. We're still talking billions of tons of soil gone every year.
Billions. So break it down for me. How does this even happen?
Picture this. Raindrops hitting bare soil. Each drop, it's like a tiny hammer, loosening those soil particles. Then the water starts flowing, creating runoff, and carries all that loose soil away.
Oh, I see. So all that muddy water you see running off fields?
That's your precious topsoil going down the drain, literally. And it's crazy to think this small-scale runoff happening year after year, that might be one of the reasons those ancient civilizations we were talking about, why their agriculture tanked.
So it's like this slow drain on the land's fertility. The handbook actually points out a few signs, like little hints that sheet erosion's happening, even if you don't see those massive gullies.
Oh, interesting. Like what?
Well, you might see soil piled up behind stuff on a slope, like a rock or even a piece of wood.
Makes sense. The runoff has to go somewhere.
Exactly. Or you might see more stones just sitting on the surface. All the finer soil around them got washed away.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then there's those little piles of soil and bits of plants caught under whatever vegetation's left.
Right, like little debris dams.
And maybe the most obvious sign, those tree roots sticking out, in areas without much ground cover. It's like the land's being peeled away.
Yeah, that's a powerful image. And it makes sense what the book says about forests. It's not just about having trees, it's the whole package, the canopy, the leaves on the ground, the undergrowth, all of it working together to slow down that water.
Makes you think about how we approach things, huh? So let's talk solutions. The book compares how things are usually done in rain-fed farming with this vetiver method.
Okay, yeah, let's dive into that.
So what's the usual way of doing things, and what's wrong with it?
Well, in a lot of places, even if the land doesn't look super hilly, farmers tend to plow and plant up and down the slope.
It seems natural just going with the flow of the land.
Right, exactly. But that actually makes runoff and soil loss worse. It's basically a fast track to sheet erosion.
Oh, wow. So it's like working against yourself.
Exactly. And the book says sometimes over half the rainfall is lost as runoff. That's water that should be going to the crops.
And obviously, the steeper the land, the faster the water goes, and the worse the damage. So how does Vetiver change the game?
Well, with the vetiver system, you plant these hedges along the contour lines, those lines of equal elevation.
Like following the shape of the land, horizontal.
Yeah, exactly. And these hedges, they act like little speed bumps for the water, slowing it down, spreading it out. And as it slows down, it drops all that silt it's carrying. So you're actually building up natural terraces over time.
Oh, that's clever. Like nature's own terracing system.
And the best part is, you don't have to do much to maintain it.
No maintenance. That sounds way better than those earthen embankments, the contour buns the book mentions.
Yeah, those things have some downsides. Like, for starters, they can be expensive to build. You might need special equipment or have to hire people, which costs money. Then there's the land they take up. The book says for every 20 hectares of land you treat, you lose a whole hectare to the buns themselves and the ditches you have to dig.
So you're losing valuable cropland.
Exactly. Plus, you're basically creating an artificial drainage system, which can lead to some areas being too wet, others too dry. And ironically, even though they're supposed to stop erosion, they can erode too. Eventually, you have to rebuild them.
So they're costly, they take up space, and they're not even a permanent solution. Not ideal.
Not ideal at all. Vetiver is a much better option.
So how does Vetiver stack up in terms of land use and all that?
Night and day, honestly. A vetiver hedge, it only takes up about 50 centimeters of land. That's nothing compared to an earthen bund.
Wow, that's a huge difference.
Right, and farmers can usually plant and maintain them themselves. No fancy tools or extra help needed. Like, the book even talks about those farmers near Mysore. They've kept their vetiver hedges going for over 100 years just by plowing around them.
It's incredible, this simple grass doing all that. So how do these hedges actually work? How do they stop the erosion and keep the water where it needs to be?
Well, if you could slice through a vetiver hedge, you'd see how those thick leaves and stems work like a wall, slowing down all that muddy water running off.
So it acts like a filter.
Exactly. And as the water slows down, it loses energy and drops all that precious silt behind the hedge. But the real magic happens underground.
Oh, tell me more.
Vetiver has this amazing root system, goes down super deep, up to 3 meters. This massive roots, it acts like an underground anchor, holding the soil together and stopping it from eroding away.
3 meters deep. That's deeper than I am tall.
I know, right? It's like having rebar for your soil.
Yeah.
And that deep root system, it does more than just stop erosion. It actually helps with pests, too.
Really? I wouldn't have guessed that.
Yeah. The roots have these aromatic oils that rodents hate. And those sharp leaves, some farmers even say they help keep snakes away. Plus, that dense network of roots, it chokes out certain weeds too, like Synodon dactylon. That stuff is a nightmare to get rid of.
Wow, so it's a multitasker. Stopping erosion, keeping pests and weeds at bay. Not bad for a humble grass.
Right. It's amazing what nature can do. But of course, setting up these hedges, it's not like flipping a switch, right? It takes a little time.
So how long does it take to get them going?
Well, those earth banks, they work right away, but they're temporary. Vetiver, it takes about 2 or 3 growing seasons to get those hedges really thick and strong enough to handle those heady rains.
So a bit of patience is required.
You got it. You might need to protect them a bit at first, maybe fill in any gaps that pop up, but once they're established, they're in it for the long haul. Not much maintenance needed, just some trimming now and then.
And that trimming, that's not just cosmetic, is it?
Nope. Trimming them down to about 30 to 50 centimeters, it does a few important things. 1, it stops them from going to seed and becoming weedy themselves. 2, it encourages them to get bushier, which helps filter the runoff even better. And 3, in some places, farmers even use the trimmings as fodder for their animals.
Wow, so nothing goes to waste.
Yeah.
Resourceful.
Yeah.
So I've talked about planting along the contour, and the book spends some time clarifying exactly what that means.
Yeah, that's important. A lot of people think that just plowing straight down the slope is following the contour, but it's not.
Yeah, that's what I would have thought too.
A true contour line, it follows a specific elevation, it wraps around the hill, following all those little dips and bumps so everything's level.
Ah, so it's not just following the general slope.
Nope, it's much more precise than that. If you plow straight downhill, you're just creating channels for the water to rush off. You're basically making little rivers on your land.
Yeah, that makes sense. So do these vetiver hedges have to be perfectly on the contour line, like those earth banks?
Actually, they have a little more wiggle room. Since their main job is to slow the water down and filter it, not totally redirect it like an earth bank, they don't have to be exactly on the line. The book suggests marking the general contour with stakes. Then you can smooth it out a bit, make it easier for the farmer to follow when they're plowing and planting.
So a little bit of flexibility is okay, practical, but the book is very specific about what to do with the ends of the hedges. They have to turn uphill.
Yeah, that's to prevent what they call end-around erosion.
End around. What's that?
Well, if you leave the ends open, the water can just flow around the sides of the hedge and escape. It totally defeats the
Oh,
purpose.
it's right. Makes sense.
But by turning the ends uphill, you're creating a little dam, stopping that water from sneaking around. And that actually helps those natural terraces form even better.
So it's all about containment, keeping that water where it needs to be. The book actually uses this great example of two farmers, Farmer A and Farmer B, to show the real-world difference this all makes.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. So, Farmer A, he's got those vetiver hedges set up, and he's plowing and planting along the contour lines, using them as guides.
Okay, so he's doing things the vetiver way.
Exactly. And because of that, his furrows hold more water. They're like little reservoirs. That extra moisture in the soil helps his crops survive dry spells, and since his topsoil and nutrients aren't washing away, he's got great yields year after year. His soil stays healthy, everything's in balance.
Sounds like a recipe for success. What about Farmer B? He's not using vetiver, right?
Nope. Farmer B is plowing up and down the slope the old way, and basically he's creating a recipe for disaster.
Oh no. How so?
Well, he's giving the water a free pass to rush off his land, and it's taking all the good stuff with it. The topsoil, the fertilizers, all gone. His crops are always thirsty, they're vulnerable to droughts. The book says the rain is only about 40 to 50% effective this way. That's a huge loss.
So he's basically wasting water and resources.
Exactly. If he keeps doing this, he might even have to abandon his farm. The soil will just be too worn out to grow anything. It's kind of a sad story, really.
Yeah, it's like a cautionary tale.
Yeah.
But the book doesn't leave him hanging, does it? There's a way for Farmer B to turn things around, right?
Absolutely. It's not too late. He can work with someone from his local agricultural extension office, and they can help him map out the contour lines on his land.
Sounds like a good first step.
It is. They just use a simple hand level, no complicated engineering needed. Once they've marked those lines, he can plow along them and plant those vetiver slips, and eventually he'll have those protective hedges in place.
So it's not too late to change course. And for those listening who are thinking, hey, I want to try this vetiver thing, what's the first step?
Well, you need to get your hands on some vetiver. You'll probably need to find a nursery that specializes in it. Or if vetiver isn't common where you live, you might need to check with botanical gardens or something.
So track down a source. Got it. What then?
Okay, once you have your vetiver clumps, you've got to prepare something called slips. You dig up the clump and separate sections that have both roots and shoots. Then you give them a little trim, cut the tops to about 15-20 centimeters and the roots to about 10 centimeters. That helps them conserve moisture and gives them a better chance of surviving.
Got it. A bit of pre-planting prep. What about the actual planting?
The best time is at the start of the rainy season. Give them plenty of moisture to get going. You plant the slips in those contour furrows you've already plowed, about 10 to 15 centimeters apart. Make sure those roots are pointing straight down and the soil is nice and firm around them.
So spacing is important.
It is. And the book stresses that a single row of slips is enough for a good hedge. You might need to fill in some gaps at first, but you can even use flower stems from nearby plants. Just bend them over and bury them. They can actually root and fill the gaps.
That's a cool trick. And we've talked about contour lines, but how do you know how far apart those hedges should be?
That's where the vertical interval comes in.
Vertical interval.
Yeah, it's basically the vertical distance between one hedge and the next going downhill. The actual distance you measure on the ground will depend on how steep the slope is. The book has a table, Table 1, that gives you some guidelines, but generally a vertical interval of 2 meters seems to work well for most situations. And if you want to know how far apart to plant those hedges on the ground, just use that table and multiply the number in the surface run column by your chosen vertical interval.
So steeper slope, closer hedges. Makes sense. And even on land that looks pretty flat, the book says contouring is still important, especially in rain-fed farming. Why is that?
Because even a slight slope can cause runoff. The book says it best, there is no such thing as flat land. Water runs off all land.
Hadn't thought of it that way.
Yeah. So if you plant on what looks like flat ground without contouring, you're losing water. It just runs off and your plants don't get what they need.
So what's the solution there?
Simple. Plant along those contour furrows. Those furrows act like little mini dams, capturing the water and giving it time to soak into the soil. They say a single furrow can hold up to 50 millimeters of rain.
Wow, that's impressive.
And again, vetiver plays a crucial role here. It's the key to making this whole system work, guiding those contour furrows and making sure they don't erode away during those heavy rains. It all comes back to vetiver.
This grass is like a superhero, stopping soil loss, conserving water. And the book actually lists a whole bunch of reasons why vetiver is so perfect for all this.
Oh yeah, it's quite a list. First off, it makes a thick, permanent hedge pretty quickly. Those roots, we talked about them, they go super deep, they're strong, they hold everything together, prevent cracks and tunnels. Plus, vetiver is a perennial, comes back year after year without much fuss.
Low maintenance, good to know.
Right. And importantly, it's basically sterile, so you don't have to worry about it becoming a weed itself. The growing point of the plant is underground, so fire and grazing animals can't really hurt it. It repels pests, it's disease resistant, and livestock usually won't eat it.
Wait, so it's like fireproof, pest-proof, and livestock-proof.
Pretty much, though the young leaves can be used as fodder in some places. And get this, it can handle drought, floods, even waterlogged soils. It doesn't compete with crops, might even help them grow better. There's even some evidence it might help fix nitrogen in the soil.
Okay, this is getting ridiculous. This one plant does it all.
I know, it's pretty amazing. And here's the best part. It's cheap and easy to plant, easy to take care of, and even easy to remove if you need to. And it grows in all sorts of soil, good soil, bad soil, acidic, alkaline, salty, you name it.
Talk about adaptability.
Right. And then there's the climate range. It can grow in temperatures from -9 to 45 degrees Celsius, and in areas with as little as 200 millimeters of rain or as much as 6,000 millimeters. Plus, it's a climax plant, which means it can survive even when other plants can't.
So if I'm hearing you right, this single plant offers a solution to erosion, drought, pests, and even fire risk.
Yeah.
That's almost unbelievable.
It's true, but hold on, there's even more. It's not just about soil and water. This plant has a ton of other uses too.
Really, like what?
Well, because it's so good at stabilizing soil, it can strengthen those earth banks in rice paddies, protect them from erosion, and keep pests out. You can use it to reinforce riverbanks and stop them from eroding into fields. On steep slopes where you can't really grow annual crops, it can help collect rainwater for those perennial tree crops like fruit trees. You can even use cut vetiver as mulch, and in the Himalayas, they use it to stabilize the stone walls in their terraces.
Wow, it's like nature's duct tape.
Exactly. And it doesn't stop there. They use it to stabilize road cuttings, the sides of roads. You can even use it to restore degraded land and stabilize gullies. It's like a pioneer plant, helps rebuild the soil. And they even use it to protect the banks of rivers and canals, even dams, from erosion and silting up.
So from small farms to massive infrastructure projects, this stuff has got it covered.
Pretty much. And beyond those big structural uses, it's also got everyday applications.
Like what?
Well, the book talks about people using it as bedding for livestock. It soaks up moisture, so their bedding stays drier longer, makes great compost too. And you can use it to create windbreaks and fire breaks. People use it for thatching roofs, as mulch, even for weaving baskets and making brooms. It's a truly versatile plant.
Incredible. It's like the Swiss Army knife of plants. So what about those who have already been using vetiver? What are they saying?
Oh, they're singing its praises. They talk about less runoff, higher groundwater levels, even streams flowing for longer during dry periods. Some have measured about 10 centimeters of silt building up behind the hedges every year on slopes up to 5%. They're literally seeing those natural terraces forming, and they love how multi-purpose it is.
So it's living up to the hype.
It really is. They've found it's great for stopping erosion in those drainage channels on hillsides where they grow crops like tobacco. And they've observed that the roots mostly grow straight down, so they don't interfere with crops too much. They've also figured out it can take about 3 years to reach peak effectiveness in drier areas. And they've noticed that planting the slips close together helps the hedge form faster. Even if there are gaps at first, those roots tend to grow together underground and create a barrier.
So patience is key.
It is. They've also found that forward-sloping terraces, they work better when you've got vetiver. And the ultimate goal, they say, is to move away from traditional terracing altogether and just let vetiver do its thing. It's amazing how it adapts to different conditions, too. Rainfall, altitude, temperature, soil type, it doesn't seem to matter. Were there any particularly surprising findings in the handbook about where vetiver was most effective?
So it's a resounding thumbs up from the users. Now, what about those potential problems like pests and diseases? So Luke mentions those, right?
They do, yeah. They've seen things like brown spot and black rust in some places, but they don't usually cause serious problems. Stem borers have popped up in China, but they seem to sort themselves out. And in general, people are picking the vetiver varieties that are known to be more resistant to those issues.
So it's pretty tough. And what about hard data? Is there anything to actually back up all these claims?
Oh, yeah. They actually did some studies. And they found that in places with vetiver hedges, there was a significant decrease in runoff and soil loss compared to areas without them.
That's great. Actual proof that it works.
Yes.
And for those who want to get started, the book gives some pointers on picking the right vetiver and even setting up nurseries.
Exactly. When you're choosing your plants, look for ones that are resistant to pests and diseases and produce lots of shoots. And if it gets cold where you are, make sure you pick a cold, hardy variety. They even talk about how to start a nursery using vetiver growing in gullies. Or you can start new plants from stem and root cuttings under plastic.
Sounds easy enough.
It is. Fertilizing and watering the nursery plants helps them grow faster, and trimming them keeps them nice and bushy. Well-drained soil is best for nurseries, from loamy sands to sandy clays. And when you're ready to plant in the field, always do it when the ground is wet. On small farms, you can even just plant along the edges of your fields. And if your land is already pretty eroded, it's best to start in the gullies and then work your way up the slopes.
So start small and build from there.
That's the idea. Make sure you fill in any gaps so you've got a solid hedge. And after you plant, give those plants a trim to help them thicken up. Even simple things like digging a little trench behind the hedge to catch more water can make a big difference.
So lots of little tips and tricks to make it even better. And, something I found really interesting was that long list of common names for vetiver in the book. It shows just how widespread and well-known this plant is around the world.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Names like Shangang Chao in China, Kaskas in India, and Akar Wangi in Malaysia. It's like this plant has a passport stamped from all over the globe.
A true global citizen. Well, this has been an amazing deep dive into the World Bank's Vetiver Handbook. Who knew this humble grass could be such a powerful tool? It's a simple, sustainable solution to a huge problem. And the fact that farmers can do it themselves is incredibly empowering. It really makes you appreciate the power of nature-based solutions.
Absolutely. It just goes to show sometimes the simplest answers are the best ones.
So to wrap things up, here's a question for you, our listener. Knowing what we know now about the damage soil erosion causes and how well this vetiver system works, what do you think are the biggest roadblocks to getting it used more widely? And what can we do, whether it's governments, organizations, or even just individuals, to overcome those challenges and really unleash the potential of this amazing plant? It's something to think about and maybe even act on.
Yeah, I think that's a great question to leave our listeners with. We've got the knowledge, we've got the tools. Now let's see what we can do with them.